Welcome to Faith Factor, where real people have faced real challenges in a very real world, and where faith has been a factor, whether in their overcoming or enduring, but where faith has helped to see them through. What happens when your child has been snatched away? One of the most devastating experiences any parent could conceivably face is the loss of a child. And sometimes the faith of many is shattered. Sometimes they leave God. Sometimes they become very, very angry and bitter. But can faith indeed make a difference? Paul has some words of encouragement in his reflection in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13. Here's what it says. Not that I have learned, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. What he's saying is that it is not the circumstances that matter, no matter how intense the need, but the sufficiency of God in enabling you to deal with these circumstances. The last verse, 13, here's what it says. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All things, Paul says. Not only Paul, but anyone who is a believer, anyone who trusts, can you indeed do all things through Christ? Can you, in the presence of the devastating loss of a child or any kind of loss, trust in God? Well, today's program, you'll find out that yes, you can trust Him always. Now, Paul tells us in the scriptures that God enables us to be content no matter what our circumstances. But sometimes the challenges are so intense that contentment goes out the window. What happens when you lose a child that you love? Sometimes an only child. Can faith be a factor in sustaining you? Let's talk with two guests who have walked the walk, who are walking the walk, and can share with us. Next to me is June Moore. Welcome, June.
Thank you.
And Connie Lackey, who is sitting next to her. So glad to have you, Connie.
Thank you.
June, I want you to share with me a bit about your daughter. What's her name?
Alisa.
Alisa. And I understand at a very early age she made the newspaper for playing the violin, and you tossed out a medical career so that you could be there to be the ideal mom. Tell me about bringing up Alisa.
Well, Alisa was, it was really a joy to parent her and to raise her. Not that every day was joyful. There were challenges. I think she might have met the criteria for being a fairly strong-willed child, but that really wasn't an issue for us. I think we worked through everything that we encountered, at least from my perspective, and I think from hers as well. I was really glad that it was perhaps a week or two before she died that I was traveling to church with her in the car and her brother. And I turned to them and I shared with them, that I was so grateful that I had had the opportunity to parent them. And, of course, sharing with them how much I loved them. And, it was a good experience.
In retrospect, it was a precious one for you. And your husband's name is?
David.
David. And we'll get into perhaps a little bit of maybe some of the emotions on that end. Connie would have her husband in the second segment share his perspective, but we might be able to get some of those reflections from you. Walk me through the tragedy. I know it's difficult, but do that for me.
Well, it was November 7th, the year 2000. It was election night, and my son and I had just settled down, turned on the television to, listen to and watch the returns, and the phone rang. And the person on the other end identified himself. He was a police officer from Ypsilanti. He asked me to confirm that I did have a daughter named Elisa, and then he said she'd been in an accident. And I, of course, got some sketchy details on where she was, and she was at the St. Joe Hospital, and I thought I'd try to see what was going on. And I initially, though, I thought, well, let's get there. And I called.
Were you alone?
Well, my son was there with me.
you?
Yes. And so I called the hospital. I got to speak to a supervisor who was on duty. And the nursing supervisor seemed more interested in knowing how long it would take me to get to the hospital. And that was just a trigger for me. I said to my son, you know, I think we've lost Elisa. And
You
of
did?
course, yes, I did.
What is
And
your
it was-
profession?
I'm a nurse myself.
So you were thinking with your nurse's hat on, what's going on here?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it was a time that I was being prepared for what was ahead. And I said to my son, you know, if I'm wrong about this, then that will be really good. But at least if this is what's actually happening, at least we're preparing for it. So
You told him that, something in your heart.
something in
told
my
you.
heart. And then I stopped trying to leave the house, and instead I made a phone call to Ypsilanti to some friends and asked them if they would go and check it out and tell me what's happening before I tried to leave.
left.
And of course, at that point, I could feel that my energy was being sapped out of me. My heart was beginning to get really heavy.
And? Okay. Difficult. Connie. Connie, tell me a bit about your son. What's his name?
Adam.
Adam. Tell me a bit about Adam.
He was 19. He had just had a birthday. He was a good kid. He was good with his hands, and he loved people. He never met a stranger. Everybody that met him, he was instantly a friend with them. And he could relate to just about anybody, if at any age, an older person or a small child. And
How old was he?
he was 19.
19 years old.
Yes.
And what happened?
He was in a Jeep rollover accident. He was the passenger. He had his seatbelt on, and he stayed with the Jeep. It rolled 2 1/4 times. The driver didn't have his seatbelt on, and he was thrown clear, and he broke his arm and his jaw, I believe.
You were at home, and was Bill with you when you...
No, I was at home. I'd just gotten home from work. I had turned the television on and was watching, I don't remember what show, but the doorbell rang, and it was not in character for me, but I turned the television off. And I went to the door, and this highway patrol was standing at the door, and he says, "Can I come in?" And I said, "Sure." And he says, "There's been an accident." And I said, I looked over at in the driveway, and my son's car was in the driveway because it was not running at the time. And I said, "Is it Adam?" And he said, "Yes." And I asked him, I said, "Is he dead?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry, he is." And then we proceeded to call my husband and tell him.
So you didn't have to deal with it alone at that point in time? What were
No.
your emotions?
I was numb. I just kept saying, "Are you sure? He's only 19. You know, it couldn't have happened to him." And he said, well, I took his wallet out of his pocket, and it was him.
Now, I'm thinking that for most people who undergo such devastation, that in essence it can't be, that you know the reality, but in a way that it's not. You know, did you feel that way? You know, that yes, maybe, but no. Did something in you kick in to say, no, this could not be?
I think absolutely. You know, deep in your heart, you hope that it's not.
Yes.
Still, there's a reality that's confronting you that it is. And I think there was a whole range of emotions, including the fact that I had gotten everything that I was going to get from her, that there would be no more. I don't know, it was just a real crazy time. I also felt that I was struggling to live myself because the pain in my chest was so severe. And it lasted perhaps until about the next day, just a crushing pain and just an intense feeling of being very weak and very helpless.
Feeling a sense of desperation.
Yes.
How did you get through it, Connie?
One day at a time.
One day at a time.
Lots of friends were there for us. We went to counseling.
Your husband and you went to counseling. Now, very often a loss like that impacts families.
Right.
Did it bring you and Bill closer together, or did it fragment you?
I think at first it kind of fragmented us because we were taking it so differently.
In what regard?
Well, he wanted to talk on the phone. You know, people would call and he would answer the phone and he would just talk, and he said that was a help to him.
To talk about your son.
Right. All I wanted to do was to go in his room and lay on his bed. And Bill couldn't understand. He couldn't stand to walk into his room. And all I wanted to be was in his room. So, you know, he kept saying, you know, come on out, you know, talk to people on the phone. That'll make you feel better. But, you know, I didn't want to do that. So,
it didn't work that way.
Right. And so the counseling helped that way because, you know, they told us that we both would go through it so differently. So, you know, after that, you know, it was
You went
easier.
to counseling.
Right.
You sought the assistance of a counselor. So hold on to that thought. Let me discuss with you, June, for a moment. Range of emotions, and did you ever look at God and say, how could you?
Actually, I didn't.
You didn't?
No, you did?
I did.
You did?
Yes.
Okay.
I think this occurred at a time in my life when my relationship with God was really probably the best it had ever been. And I'd had so many experiences leading up to that point, and I've just been able to accept that whatever happens, happens. You know, we're really at war here. We feel that this is peacetime, but we are at war. We've been at war.
Spiritual warfare, two worlds.
That's right. That's right. And we're just casualties, and it happens. And in a lot of my self-talk, I recognized that it was perhaps just my turn. Everybody gets a turn. I never doubted my specialness to the Lord. I did say to myself, I am special to Him, but I'm not exempt. And, you know, there were a lot of these perspectives that sort of got me through.
But you, Connie, looked up and asked God, how could you?
Yeah, why? You know.
Were you angry with Him?
Yes. You know, I couldn't figure out why. You know, he was so young. I said, you know, if you had to take somebody, why couldn't you take me or my husband? You know, we had lived, you know, a good life, and Adam hadn't had a chance yet. So, yeah, I was.
Did you find yourself distancing yourself from God because He'd failed you?
At first, yes, yes. But I can see His hand in a lot of the things that, you know, that eventually started to comfort me, and especially the promise that I have that I will see Him again. We will be together.
So really, it finally came around from God, how dare you, to, you know, maybe you do have a plan, and then the promise is that maybe not for now, but for the time to come.
Yeah.
And you know, perhaps I might have gone there if I hadn't also had the challenge of comforting or trying to be of some sort of comfort and support to my son, who was having a tremendous time with this. He was in his senior year of high school, and
that
he
made
was
it so difficult for him because he couldn't deal with the loss.
Yes.
Hold that thought for a moment. We'd be right back and talking about what happens when death snatches your child away.
If you have been inspired by the incredible stories of faith in this series, then we have good news for you. Now you can own your very own copy of each of these 13 episodes in the first season on DVD or video cassette. This is a series you'll treasure, and it makes a great gift too. This 13-part series with Cynthia Prime makes a wonderful gift for a friend or family member. Just call us at 1-800-752-3226 during regular business hours, and we'll be happy to take your order. You may also order it online at www.3abn.org.
Now, we've been chatting with Connie Lackey as well as June Moore on what happens when a child is snatched away, to go through that experience, because so many of you are encountering that particular pain right now. And we have now Bill Lackey joining us. You've heard from Connie how she dealt with it, and now we're going to hear from Bill, because it's a father's perspective. Connie was saying that you wanted to kind of talk it out, talk the pain out. She wanted to go into his room and hide and stay there. Talk to me about your experience.
Well, I think men and women are so much different, and husband and wife are so different. And I just couldn't stay in bed like she did. And I had to just be doing something, I just couldn't sit still. And so many people were calling, and relatives and friends, and I just couldn't go in Adam's room. I could not go in the room.
She didn't want to leave it, and you couldn't stand
going to it. And I just said, how can you get in his bed? And the counselor, that was, to me, one of our number one, the work furnished of a psychologist for both of us, 6 weeks. And Carol couldn't have been any better, than what she was. It was amazing.
Helping you to understand the difference in responses. Now, what did she say relative to your response and Connie's response?
I think the main thing is men and women, husband and wives, grieve different. And one of the most important things we learned is after you lose a child, the divorce rate goes up to 80%.
Yes, yes. Families split apart in the process. Do you feel that the counseling that you and Connie had helped?
It helped 100%, because we just couldn't. How could you go in there and lay in his room for 12, 16 hours a day?
You seemed to resent the fact that she did that.
Yes.
You didn't like her in his bed?
I didn't.
Okay,
she would stay in the bed and I'd have to stay in our bedroom.
Yes.
So it was already kind of pulling us apart right from the start.
And so you were better able to empathize with what she was trying to hold on to.
Well, the counselor explained, that, when you grieve, especially husband and wives, there's so much difference between a male and a female. The male has to feel like he's doing something, I couldn't go out and mow the yard, but I could still stay on the phone and do all the paperwork that was involved with it.
Sort of your escape.
Yeah.
Your escape. Did you feel, she felt very angry at God. How dare you? Did you feel angry with God?
Well, I got to admit, I did not ever blame God. And that was one of the things that Connie and I had a hard problem with. I think she felt that, I just never thought it was God's fault. I know we got, it was Satan's problem, not God's. And
did it draw you closer to God, or were you having some questions of your own?
I think it drew me closer to God. The whole process. The church family was just amazing. The church family actually knew how to talk to us better than our relatives did.
So you found a very supportive environment in the faith family. They nurtured and encouraged you.
One of the elders in our church said that the night before Adam was killed, he had a strong feeling to pray for Bill. He didn't know why, but he had a strong feeling to pray for Bill and Connie. And we just knew that, God knew
God was
12
with you.
Or 24 hours ahead of time.
Yeah.
And
doesn't make it any easier, but still understanding that he was there in the picture. Yeah. Jude, you were sharing a little bit earlier that the weight of pain was not just yours, but it was your son's. What's his name?
Jeremy.
Now, was Jeremy and Elisa close?
They were very, very close. As a matter of fact, I remember one time we were talking and they reminded me in no uncertain terms that I didn't know everything about those going on with them, but they both knew everything about each other. I accepted that. That was okay.
Very tight.
Very tight. And as a matter of fact, after this occurred, he normally whenever he went on a trip and he came back, the first person he would share with was his sister. And he did say to me, it's so tough having to share with you.
Oh.
Not that we didn't share, we shared.
Yes, but it was
just like, it's different, it really was.
His sister was the other part of him.
Yes.
How did you find yourself with your own weight of grief having to somehow be there to minister to Jeremy?
Well, I knew I had to. And it was difficult because he was also the class pastor and was having to try to minister to the school, or the school pastor really. So there were times when the school had assembly devotionals and he would be the leader. And this occurred soon after the experience. And I watched him struggle with that whole thing. And I think for him, he might have been asking God why. And he was a little bit angry with God. But then I think he came to terms with the fact that, you know, he didn't have anywhere else to turn. I mean, God is really it for us. And he wrote a paper that at the end he said, you know, if I left God, I would be going and serving the enemy who actually is responsible for what happened to my daughter. Doesn't make sense. So, you know, somehow we got through that. We're probably still working through it.
Yeah, yeah. Did you have counseling? Did you and your husband have counseling?
Well, we didn't in that formal sense, but you know, to get through every day of my life, I always have counsel. And I do have some dear friends who are psychiatrists, like one psychiatrist, Dr. Rudy Brooms, who I must say he's been with us and he's been with me, he's been my counselor for many, many years.
So he's
all through my
supported.
marriage, very supportive.
Did the loss bring you and your husband closer together, or did it drive you apart?
Perhaps it might have caused a little bit of a wedge, perhaps. I don't know. It certainly didn't bring us closer together.
Right now, there are so many families dealing with what you're dealing with. Now, you said that the church family was very, very supportive. Did you ever encounter any time in the experience when you got the feeling that they felt that, you know, it's been long enough, that you've got to move on with it now, move on with life, that you've grieved enough, come on, move on? Did you ever get any of that feeling from the people that you're around, let's say, from the church family or other?
No, as a matter of fact, from the time this happened, and I'm still so touched by people's responses to us. People have always been so supportive, showing us that they care, and I haven't felt anyone sharing with me that I need to give it up. As a matter of fact, I've declared at home and to my friends that I will be crying the rest of my life, so get comfortable with my tears.
It's a journey. It's a journey that you've coped. Did you sometimes people get into the life after life? Did you ever wonder, where is she? Where is she? God, I wish I could talk to her.
I must admit that I have desired to believe that she's in heaven. That perspective was so appealing to me after my loss. But then, of course, I have to deal with the reality of God's word that that's not the case.
And that she's asleep.
And that she's asleep, and we await the resurrection.
Wait the resurrection. Bill, did you find that people had a clock on you? I mean, that they felt that you'd grieved enough, or were they always consistently supportive?
Well, that was, you know, probably 2 months after, you know, we lost Adam. There was a family member called, and I think Connie was probably in his bed. And it was a family member said, well, it's been 2 months. I think you ought to be up and ready to go now, you know, talking about Connie, you know. And it just, you know, we still talk about that. It's been 8 years, but, you know.
That was very painful
that's
for
like
you to hear.
almost stabbing you in the back. And, you know, people just don't know what to say. That's one of the things we've learned. They don't know what to say when you lose a child. And
what would you like someone to say to you when you've lost, you know, in the presence of a loss? How would you like them to relate to you?
Well, a lot of people don't want to talk about the person you lost, but we've learned in Compassionate Friends that you really want to keep the memory of your child alive, you know, and we want to talk about Adam, what the things he did, what made us happy, you know, the happy times. And we just had his birthday, you know, a couple of weeks before he was in the accident. And, you know, so that's one of the things. And you just have to be honest with people, and just don't try not to hide from them. If you know somebody that lost a child, just say, is there anything we can do for you? I think that helps too. You're the neighbor next door.
Just somebody will come and ask you if there's anything, rather than suggest that I think you ought to do this or I think you ought to feel that way.
That's right.
How about you, June? What are your thoughts?
I have just been so grateful for every word, hug, anything that anyone shared with me that I
Do you
didn't
like
have.
people to talk about Elisa? Do you like
and I
them to
do.
know that she has been a part of your life?
Yes, and I loved hearing too things that I didn't know about her from people who knew her and who experienced her in a different way. You know, I've just appreciated it all.
What was that?
I've just appreciated all of the feedback that I've gotten.
Do you feel that she was ready?
From listening to other people talk about their experiences with her, at the end of the burial, I felt yes, she was ready. If you had asked me prior to that, I would have said no, maybe. And only because, you know, you're close to the person, you're aware of we're all aware of each other's weaknesses and strengths. But yes, but I think she was ready.
Bill, in just a very quick sentence or two, if you had to tell the audience, look, if you're going through a pain that I go through, here's what helps. Why don't you look at them and tell them?
Well, first of all, for husband and wife, it's very important to realize that we grieve so different, and it's really a good opportunity for Satan to get in there and split your marriage up. And I think that looking back, that you need to get a counseling, you know, and 6 weeks was just enough for us. 6 visits, to both of us together, and just taught us that, you know, we grieve different, and that helped us tremendously.
That helped you, and you didn't go for counseling, June, but you had the family of faith supporting you, and then you had your own personal walk with God.
Yes, I did.
Thank you so much, June and Bill, and of course Connie. Death hurts, but Jesus is always sufficient. The path is not easy, but He is sufficient. Now, the loss of a loved one is always devastating, it's always challenging. But what we're looking at here is the sufficiency of God to see you through. Counseling helps, the support of the faith family does, but if nothing else is there, you can hang on to the assurance of God's presence with you. Psalms 31:24 says this, "Be of good courage, and He shall strengthen your heart, all you who hope in the Lord." What God is promising here is the strength that you need, the courage that you need. He will give it to you. He will support you. He will see you through the dark moments and into the light so that you can eventually praise Him and thank Him.